Thanks. Hi.
Hello.
Hi everyone. I know the setup has changed. We were familiar with the different setup. This one is cozier, more neutral, I would say. It's an honor to have you, Florin. So Florin is a very special guest. He's an art enthusiast working on a groundbreaking project, in my opinion, which is redefining how art exhibition is in this world. So I would love to talk about the first intention that you had behind that project, because we know that each project has like a starting point where you decided that this needs to be done. So take us there.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me here.
Of course.
And Happy New Burberry year.
Thanks.
First, to start with.
Thanks.
January 13th. I didn't know, by the way. Found that this morning.
Good coincidence.
Yeah, where did that start? It started with a phone conversation. I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and originally I'm from Romania, and she's from Romania as well, and we were talking about how, there's a lot of Romanian artists that not many people know about, and they've influenced culture and art in many ways, and especially in the 20th century there was a big diaspora of Romanians going outside of the country because of wars, world wars, and all of that kind of stuff. And everything that we found online about them was either too superficial or very academic. So, very high-minded philosophy and people kind of telling you what you should see in this art. And it didn't really connect. Or it was the opposite end of the spectrum, just a bit superficial. So we were like, well, why don't we do something about this, right? And we started researching, and we picked Constantin Brâncuși, who was a sculptor born in Romania, lived most of his life in Paris. And that was the focus because there's a lot of archive that we have about him. There's footage. He documented his life really well with pictures, video. Unfortunately, no audio recordings, but there's a lot of information that we have about his life, and he was a very interesting guy. So we started researching his life to tell his real story. So, why did he do what he did? Why he walked from Romania to Paris for 2 years. And we started going into depth into that, why that happened, how that happened, because not like he just started walking and decided to go to Paris, right? There was a lot of steps, but we'll probably get into that. How he sued the US government in a very famous modern art trial. And we started getting into these details and started telling his story through multimedia. And eventually we got to a point where our project that we called Intimate Glimpses, we realized, wait a second, this can be applied to all artists, right? And I think that people all the time have an affinity towards certain aesthetics. You like that kind of aesthetic because you like the fine lines, or you like the blocky nature of some painter. And a lot of times when you go to a formal space like a museum, or you look at something online, it's very cold, it's very academic. Not in all cases, but a lot of the times that's the case. And we're like, okay, we're here to help people build closer relationships with artists that they have an affinity for. And that's the ultimate goal, really, is to help people build that closer relationship to artists that they have an intuition that they like, right? And with that, I think it's almost trying to create little digital corners on the internet for these artists, right? Because, there's literally tens of books written about Brâncuși. They're all very academic, and you pick them up and you don't really want to read them, most of them, right? But there's a few exceptions, but I feel that creating these digital corners for artists on the internet can help people see where a lot of art has come from and how we got to this point where we are here in 2024.
What I really loved about your project, Intimate Glimpses, it's you added another dimension to the art exhibition, which is sound. So instead of going into a space physically, you also go there sonically with the events that happened and the life of the artist. Like it's more immersive. The choice of Brâncuși is based on your personal preference, right? So how would you think this project develop in terms of like choosing artists? How would you choose your next artist, for example?
Yeah, I think it's got to be someone who I'm interested in personally, because this at the moment is still a passion project. The team that I'm working with and myself, we're all doing this because we really want to, right? There is also a question of how much information is about the person, right? So there was one of the founders of the Dada movement in the early 20th century was a Romanian Jewish guy called Tristan Tzara, and he was in Zurich at Café Voltaire founding Dadaism. There's not a lot about his life out there as much as there is about Brâncuși's life. So we might tackle him, we might find archives at some point and go deeper into his life, but there's not as much out there. So that's another criterion. The next one that we were looking at was Georgia O'Keeffe, and the other one was Hundertwasser, who was an Austrian painter and architect, really. Have you heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Hundertwasser. Yeah, he really disliked straight lines. So everything that he does is very colorful, very nature inspired, very organic, a lot of wonky, wobbly lines. And he's one of the interesting artists that his art got translated into architecture. So if you go to Vienna, if you go to some places in Switzerland, you'll see buildings built in his style.
Okay.
So the walls...
So wasn't he the one drawing trees? Like he has a specific way of drawing trees?
Yeah.
I think that's
it looks very psychedelic.
Yeah.
Lots of colors, and the walls are not straight. There's no
windows.
Corners in these buildings. It's very... I think he said something like he is the doctor for buildings or something like that.
We talked about the choice, and what about the format that you chose for your project? So you chose your project. You decided to have a website for it, and why that choice again?
Yeah, well, it was so. Just to give a bit of context, what we've put out so far is a website. intimateglimpses.com. Go and visit, and we were at this exhibition in Timișoara in Romania, which is one of the biggest exhibitions about Brâncuși in the last 30 years, with pieces coming from all over the place, the Guggenheim, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Tate in London, etc. It's a great exhibition. While we were there, we were thinking, well, we've done all this research, we were working on a podcast, editing videos, etc., and what could we do to help people understand us better? Because it was great, the experience of being there and seeing the things in HD and as in person, in flesh, and being able to go around the sculptures. You can't get that on the internet. So first thing I'd recommend people to just go and see it. That goes with any art, I think. And okay, how do we do this? So we started taking pictures, a lot of high definition pictures inside the exhibition. And then we put out these audio clips telling a story about 6 of the sculptures in the exhibition. And why audio? Well, people are familiar with audio guides, right?
Yeah, audiobooks as well.
Yeah, audio guides have existed in museums for a long, long time, but usually they are quite dry, right? They don't really focus on the life of the artist. They will give you some details like he went to school here, and in this year he went to that city and collaborated with that person.
Boring.
But it's a bit dry, right? They don't focus on the personal aspects and what makes that actually interesting. So, for example, there's this sculpture called The Kiss, right? And it's a very interesting sculpture because it's about a couple hugging and kissing together, and it's about well, I don't want to tell people what it's about, right? But it's about an infinite love, right? That's the main concept behind it.
You might want to do some research to.
Maybe we can put things up, you know, for people to see, and you know that was a motif that Brâncuși developed throughout his life. So initially it was a headpiece for a grave, and that turned into him drawing that on letters to one of his lovers, and also signing letters to some of his friends with the motif of the kiss, of two people hugging and kissing together, and eventually also got translated into what he calls the boundary marker, so quite a tall, maybe 2 meter high little tower that had the motif there that he wished to place at national boundaries, to remind people of the importance of love, and you know, we just need to love each other and not fight over land. But he developed that throughout his life, and we told the story through his relationship with Mart Lebherz, who was a 20-year-old that when he was 50, they fell in love, and they exchanged very passionate letters about, you know, when he was on his way to America for an exhibition, they were exchanging passionate letters, and you can see how this 50-year-old guy was, you know, very anxious about his relationship with this girl. He was worried, she was worried. They were also very playful. He would cut out pieces from magazines of a reptile and a crocodile and a lizard and attach it and tell stories about it. He wanted to take the letters and turn them into a book, and he would draw the kiss on these letters. So I think people hearing that is a lot more interesting than telling someone that this was made out of stone and it was made for this client and that's it, right? And unfortunately, we don't get, I think, enough of that and enough of an accessible way to put a sculpture in context, right? Because if you think about it, a lot of this art was made, you know, tens of years ago, hundreds of years ago sometimes, right? And society has moved on since, aesthetically, cultural references, right? Unless you study art history or you study art and you make it a real focus, maybe you don't understand, well, what's the point of that, right? Or you're not drawn. But I think stories are a way to, it's almost like a platform, right? To enable people to understand, oh, that's why this is interesting, and they can connect more with what they see there. So to answer your original question, why a website? Well, it was the easiest thing to do, or to combine audio and visual information, right? So we wanted to make it audio because I think it's a special medium. It can transport you to a new place, and it's full of emotion. And visual because you need to look at sculptures, right? That's what it is. So let's see in the future, if we do different types of art, we might choose different media, right, to best represent the stories of artists.
This is how I see the project, your project. It's like when you're walking around the Medina, for example, you need that guide with you. Like you need that human touch that knows the context better, and that has a lot of hidden stories to tell you, and that way you're gonna enjoy the space more, and it feels more human. And I would say what you're trying to do is also that, but for art exhibitions. It's like you're missing that sound that's going to explain things to you, tell you the background of the artist, with the voice of the artist, the fact that you use the voice actors to really feel like the context and understand really who the artist was. I mean, that's a really good touch.
Yeah, and for example, the exhibition, so one of the other sculptures is called Bird in Space. And really, if you look at it, it kind of looks like an elongated banana, right? But it's a beautiful piece of art made out of bronze. And it was the center of this trial, right? When he was shipping sculptures to the US in 1926, the customs officers looked at that and said, well, that's not art, that's not a piece of sculpture, and they charged 40% import tax on it. And Edward Steichen, who was his friend and had bought the piece from him, complained about it and decided to help Brâncuși sue the US government to show that that's a piece of art and not, I think they classified it under kitchen utensils and other objects, right? And they won the trial. And if you look at the story, the kind of questions that were asked in the trial were ridiculous. It's very absurd and very, very funny. I'll let people check out the story on the website to see what I mean. But when we were there, we were looking at the sculpture and bronze, very well illuminated. And it kind of felt like there's marks on it. And I was like, what? Did someone actually touch it? Like, that shouldn't be the case, right? And I asked one of the attendants in the corner, sorry, there seem to be these marks here. What's up with that? And she said, well, don't worry. Like, everyone asks me this question. Like, when we handle it, people have to use gloves, and you're not allowed to touch it. Mm-hmm. But everyone asked that question. But this piece used to be at the Guggenheim Museum, and they kind of like their parties there. And there's a story that apparently, you don't know if it's true, but maybe this piece was actually knocked over and it was broken, and they had to put it back together because the base was broken from the actual piece. So just asking that question and eliciting that story made it even more interesting for me. Like, something I didn't know. This sculpture was the center of a controversy. Yeah, here's another controversy, right? That comes with it. So I think it speaks right to your point about having that guide to guide you through a space and give you the unknown stories. I think that's a great question. I think for people to ask in museums. Go to a museum and ask the attendants, what can you tell me that I wouldn't know from reading everything? And I think you'll be surprised what people tell you.
Also, during art exhibitions in formal spaces, I mean, when you go to your first one, it's not like you're kind of impressed by the work that's done, but less, you're not focused on the work sometimes. You're more focused on the space, on the scenography that's done, on the lighting, on the techniques that were used, but maybe less on the story of the artist, on the intention of the work, on the people involved in his life that made him do or go into that direction. So I would say your project also guides us, and of course it leaves you space for your personal interpretation, but also guides you sort of, so it doesn't throw you, and you're not alone inside that art exhibition, just trying to grasp some things. You might not grasp all of what the artist, all of the intention of why that art exhibition is there in the first place. So there's this also.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, right? And I think there's places that do this well, and a lot of places that don't do this very well. Like, I've got a friend who told me that, well, whenever I go to an art gallery or a museum, what I do is I look at who donated the piece, and then I research their lives, because that's more interesting than what's written there. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, there's this rich person, and how did they make their money, and how did they come to acquire that piece? And
where the piece comes from.
Yeah, sometimes that's a lot more interesting than what's written on the side there. And I think it's a balance. It's almost like the more you know, the more you can place that into context. And that's kind of what we also want to do in the future, is to start relating pieces and artists to each other. Because, you know, in the early 20th century, Paris was a hub, right? You know, Picasso knew Brâncuși. Brâncuși didn't really like Picasso, by the way. But, you know, people like Francis Picabia, Marcel Duchamp, Eric Satie, all these artists were hanging out together, writers, sculptors, painters, right? And sometimes you say, oh, you know, he influenced him and she took something from her and so on. But that's also, I think, another feature of our project that we want to highlight in the future is how are all these things connected, right? And you suddenly start seeing connections between different artists and what they were inspired by. And yeah.
I would like to talk about your background and how did you start really getting into art and really appreciating it?
Yeah. Well, where do we start? I think we start when I was 10 or so. I don't know, I was always interested in stories as a kid. And it's funny, my mom sent me a picture a few months ago of a little article they wrote for the school magazine when I was 10. And it had something like, oh yeah, the future is going to be all about flying cars and surgeons doing surgeries in VR and all of that. And I read it and I was like, whoa, was that me when I was 10?
Visionary.
Where did that all go? No, it's not so much that, but I was interested in all of this stuff and technology, and then sort of school took that out of me a lot. But luckily, I was very lucky to sort of connect back to my passion for technology. And I studied psychology and got into brain science, and I did a few years of research into neuroscience, neuroimaging in particular, but always kind of thinking about media, and I was interested in media. So I did a bunch of research around how people watch movies, and then got into technology, and I've been working for a learning company for the past 6 years, and learned a lot of the storytelling tricks and tips and how to tell a story and what's involved in producing materials and how do you build a website and how do you build technology. And I was always interested in art. You know, living in London, you have great access to galleries, a lot of it for free, so it's you're always exposed to it, right? I've always also had, I think, artistic friends, you know, people who, you know, played in bands or were photographers or designers, and I was always a bit on the outside, but was intrigued by it. And really, the whole catalyst was I was always intrigued by Brâncuși's work because, you know, when you grow up, you know, he was always appreciated as the greatest sculptor that we ever had, and but we never really learned anything interesting at school about him. I was always just interested and I liked his aesthetic, and then I bought a book about him and I started reading it, and then I had that conversation with my friend, and then that sort of accelerated everything. So it accelerated wanting to read more, to buy books, to go to exhibitions, not just about Brâncuși, but try to do that more regularly with other artists as well. And yeah, I can also recall there was a big moment, I think, in my first or second year of university where I went to the Tate to a Picasso exhibition, and you know, it kind of sounds silly saying it now, but I saw how, you know, he took a piece and he iterated over it 5 or 6 times, right? And I could see the development of the piece. I was like, oh, he wasn't just like coming onto a canvas and doing a brilliant take instantly, right? Even Picasso had to iterate and had to, you know, do something and then try to do it better and try to do it better and try to do it differently, right? Even he had to do that. And that was really inspirational for me. I was like, oh, okay, if he can do it, I can do it as well. Not that I'm a great painter, I couldn't even draw, but it gave me a bit of confidence, let's say, right? And it gave me confidence to start doing this, and you have to kind of come as an outsider from the art world, because, you know, I'm not quote unquote an artist, right? But I like learning from artists. I like hanging out with artists, whatever being an artist means, you know. I don't think there's necessarily a strict definition of what being an artist means. You know, there's an art in all sorts of things.
Absolutely. And when you said school took some artistic parts of you, or that curiosity, and now from a perspective of someone who works for a learning company, how would you define what school took exactly from you, and how can we keep that personal side of each kid, and just feed into their curiosity instead of taking it away?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of things, but one part of it, I think, is confidence. I think in the school system that I grew up in, you weren't encouraged to have confidence, to explore and to make mistakes. You just had to get the right answer, right? And if you didn't do it right, you were punished or made fun of, or it was frowned upon, right, to make mistakes. So I think we need to instill confidence in young minds, that they can explore and they can create, because I think, you know, young minds, they look up to certain things that they want to do, and they want to do things like adults, right? Like when we were kids, we probably wanted to do what adults did, right? And we can actually enable young people to take that seriously. Like if you have a 10-year-old and they want to be a programmer, or they want to do an animation, right? They actually have all the tools to do that. And it's exactly what a 30-year-old animator would do. Okay, maybe they don't have the same skill, they don't have the same eye, background, etc., but they're doing quote unquote adult things, right? And they're taking it seriously, right? Like we were talking, you know, in your role as a teacher, that's what you do. You enable, right, children to do things that adults do, and I think they gain confidence, right, in that, and they explore what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, and I think that's very important. It's creating that space for them to be able to explore and produce artifacts, whether that's a video, it's code, it's a research paper, it's a talk, it's a presentation, it's whatever it is, right? They're doing it, and they're taking it seriously, right?
Absolutely. And we said this is how I think about it. I think creativity inside schools need to be treated as literacy, or as important as literacy. If you are able to have kids who are creative in their problem solving and in their way of looking or solving problems, or looking at things in general, I mean, you have succeeded. That dimension of the creative dimension added to other skills that they like, I don't know, engineering, maths, or that dimensions is as important as those other dimensions. And I would say it's more important nowadays in this era to be creative, and it will be a better market fit afterwards. So how or what do you think about like the importance of creativity inside the learning process in general, or inside schools?
It's super important. That's the easy answer.
Yes.
I don't know, I mean, I'm not going to say anything new about this that people, I think, don't intrinsically know. I think it's something that we know intuitively, right? That it's important. I guess maybe the one thing to say is that something like creativity, you don't go and learn to be creative, right? Abstractly, like, oh, I'm just. It is kind of like, oh, I'm going to business school and I'm learning business. You know, yeah, there are certain things that you can learn at business school, but ultimately, if you want to learn how to run a company, you should run a company and start your own company, right? That's the best way to learn it. And I think that applies to what we call creativity as well. You just have to produce, right? And that's how you become creative. It's a muscle, right? Nobody's going to teach you the formula, right, to creativity. So, you know, I remember when my dad was telling me when I was, I think about, 8, 9, 10, I was also seeking validation. I was like asking my parents, like, oh, am I creative? And that's another part of it, is being creative and having, again, confidence, right? Do you really need that validation from others to know that you're creative, that you're producing quality work, right? And I think that it's a thing that you learn, I think, over time, right? But by building confidence, that maybe you don't need validation from others to do it. You can gain confidence, and that's, I think, going back to the role of school, that's where mentors are very important, right? Because they give you that, they help you gain that confidence, right? They don't give you the confidence, but they help you gain the confidence. And the same with peers, right? They, having an encouraging group of peers to do your work is better than people telling you that you shouldn't bother with it and just leave it. Now that doesn't mean that you don't need the feedback, right? You need feedback to improve, right, and to get better at the craft, the skill. But it's almost like there's a technical aspect of it, of creativity. There's also the motivational, the why, right? Why you're doing it and having the confidence to engage in it.
And to go back to your project, I mean, where do you see intimate glimpses, let's say in 5 years?
5 years. Fingers crossed. I'd like to have a physical space where we're able to tell really good stories about art and artists, really, in a big hub, right? And that enables people to access art. And I think there's another aspect to it, which is maybe by that point we would have highlighted the intimate glimpses of not so well-known artists, right? Whether they're contemporary or not. So another part of the project is working with artists that we meet, and we interview them and we try to tell their story. And they're not famous, but there's a beauty sometimes in these stories of why someone who's 50 and a painter and grew up in Scotland and sees art as therapy, as a therapeutic process that helps them process emotions and reflect on their own upbringing and family. And I think it's very relatable to a lot of people. So I think it's two things. I hope we have an actual physical space, because that would make it, more, would have an impact, right? If you have a physical space, I think, in the world of art, you've sort of made it, right? But, if you have that space in London, then, to be able to afford the rent and everything that comes with it, then you're probably doing well, right?
Probably doing something right.
Yes, you're probably doing something right. the other aspect is highlighting and promoting the stories of artists who aren't so well known. Because that, I think, can inspire other people and give confidence to other people to do more of that, right? For more people to engage in art.
All right. So in that physical space, are you planning to have a team with you? If you could describe that. I mean, are you going to have video editors, like employees?
Well, I guess we would need to. I haven't thought about it. I haven't drafted a business plan for it.
Okay, got it.
Right, but look, actually next month in February, I'm going to have a little creative retreat with a friend of mine, where we're going to spend a few days in a cottage somewhere in the countryside to reimagine the exhibition experience. So let's take an exhibition about a sculpture like Brâncuși's sculpture, and let's think, how would we do it differently? Right? We initially were talking about this concept of an exhibition with just one piece of art. There's a bookshop in Japan that only sells one book. It rotates every week, but they only sell one book. And what they sell is the experience, right? I haven't been, but I'm guessing it is quite an experience to be sold just that one book.
I'm hooked. I already want to buy that book.
And we thought, okay, well, when you go to an exhibition, you sometimes see, 30, 60, depending on the gallery or museum, pieces, and by the end you're a bit tired, and it's like you don't even read what's written at the end of the exhibition, right? It's like your mind is full and you're overwhelmed by all the art that you've seen. You probably want to go back again, but if you have to pay another 30 quid for it, you're not going to do it, unless you have a dedicated budget for that. And we're like, okay, well, let's flip that on its head and just have one piece of art. But before you get to it, you go through an experience of learning about the artist, and maybe you touch the materials that they've used to make that piece. Maybe you have to sit down a bit and get a bit mindful, meditate for 3 or 5 minutes to make you more receptive to the piece that you're going to have in front of you. Maybe you see, a video, right? Maybe it's an interactive video, right? You choose to explore that person's childhood, or you choose to explore their time at, in Paris, or their friends, or you see the connections. And only then maybe you actually see the piece, and it's revealed to you as a surprise. You don't know what the piece is going to be beforehand, but it's about that particular artist. So these are just some ideas, right, that we're going to play around with and try to see how do we incorporate it in a coherent experience that guides you but gives you agency to build a connection with the artist and the piece of art. And I think it's, what are the tools to do that? Well, it's any tool, right? But we're not thinking like, oh, we have to use VR, we have to use augmented reality, we have to use this and that, because I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it.
Limiting.
And it's kind of like you're the tail wagging the dog, right? Instead of the other way around. And I see a lot of that, I think, in London especially, honestly. I see a lot of, hey, look, this fancy tool and this shiny toy, and we made something that doesn't actually make sense, but it has the word VR in it, and it's interactive and whatever, right? And you kind of go there and it's like, oh, okay, I don't see the point in this, and that's because it's driven by people just wanting to use some tools instead of thinking, well, what I want to convey with this, what I want to make people feel at the end of the exhibition. What do I want them to stay with them at the end of that experience?
So now that you've started this creative project, I'm sure it's been a while that you've been thinking about it and just wondering how will it be shaped as, and etc. And so a lot of people who have creative projects tend to just keep imagining and keep dreaming about it, keep doing research. So at some point they have to stop. So it has to take a certain form. And what if we don't know what that form is? What if we still don't? We don't even know how to make a business plan. Let's say I'm an artist. I don't even know what a business plan is. I mean, there's a book called "Artists Don't Starve," and it talks about that fine line between being an artist and being like a businessman, and how you should treat your art and also make money at the same time. So I like the fact that you already started your project, and then you're going to think about all these other details. Maybe you already know because of your background because you're a tech guy. And so what advice would you give to someone who wants to start a creative project and still is in that period of just wondering how?
Whether to do it or not.
Or how to do it.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's every person's different, and you need to find out what works for yourself. My initial reaction is to just fucking do it. Just fucking do it. Like there's like people in life who, before they go running, they need to make sure they have the right shoes, and the watch is calibrated, and they have the water with electrolytes in it, and the right type of short, and they know the route that is gonna be nice around them and so on. And there's people who just put their shoes on and they just go and run, right? And that's not to say though that you don't need to be in the right mindset and to have a lot of factors coming together to help you actually do something well, right? Whether financial, emotionally, you need to be in a certain place to be able to do that. But people just hear that loud, just do it. What does that mean? I think there's a few things that enable that. I think talking to people really helps. So if you see someone who does something like that, talk to them, grab some coffee, and I think you'll be surprised how many people are very generous with their time, and they'll encourage you to do it. I think there's the internet, obviously. How do I do X or Y? The internet is a great resource to do that, and to learn how to do these things if you really want to do it. And then it's also maybe a reflection why you're doing what you're doing, right? Like, why is it? Am I doing this to become famous, right? Am I doing this to get a lot of likes on Instagram for what I'm doing? Am I doing this to make money? And at that point, is that content or is that art anymore, right?
So just like a manifesto of where do you want to go? Why do you do it?
Yeah, and being honest with yourself about that. I think that's very important. And there's so many things that pull you in different directions. And, if you ask people for advice, they'll tell you have to have social media, or you have to have that kind of plan, or you have to do this or that. And I find that it's like someone who's got a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? No, you have to figure out what are your objectives, where do you want to go, and be honest with yourself, right? And then try to find the tools and the people and the environments that will help you get there, right? So it's hard, and you got to be, I think, truthful to yourself and what you want and why you do it. But probably doing it is better than not doing it, right? That's the bottom line, because otherwise you're just gonna, 10 years later you might regret, well, what if I had done that, or what if, and I think that once you start doing things, well, you kind of get a taste, right, of it, and you know whether you like it or not. And there's a great quote, I don't know who said it, because, on the internet you see all sorts of quotes, but I'm going to paraphrase here, and it was something along the lines of, I think it was Goethe who said it, at least that's what I remember. Once you start making a serious effort in a direction, you will see how things fall into place. And it's a bit woo-woo and hippie to say that.
But it makes sense.
But I think it's just trust the process, right? And things will fall into place. Because you will start noticing things. You'll start noticing people who can help you and who you can collaborate with and who you can learn from. Your attention will be directed in that if you start making a serious effort towards it. And I think that's important. Like Brâncuși, he has this famous quote, which apparently, I'm not sure how true that is, but it was written on his wall when he was a poor artist in Paris. He came to Paris, he had no money, he worked as a plongeur, with washing dishes, and he specialized in washing glasses, right, for years, and he got a scholarship to, sustain himself and so on. But he had, this quote is attributed to him, which is, create like a god, command like a king, work like a slave. Right, and it
looks like a Conor McGregor quote.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he would be very good at UFC, but you got to work at it. It's you got to learn your craft and develop your craft and really be serious about it.
I mean, all those big artists, what they have in common is that they dreamed really big, and they had no boundaries, and they always held themselves in such a high place. That's why, like he said, think as a god, or
create like a god.
Create like a god. It's like a metaphor of having no boundaries at all, and just having that trust in your craft, and even sometimes be insane enough to consider it as the only craft that's there. But I mean, you have to have a certain humility in order to learn and be able to climb little by little. So it's a tricky quote.
Yeah, it's that paradox where I think somehow in life one has to be both humble and very confident at the same time, right? Because every situation will require both things of you, right? To be both confident in how you present yourself and in your ambitions and what you want to do, but also be humble to say, oh, I got to learn. There's something to learn here. That could be better. Right? I don't have all the answers. Right? So it's a thing that you don't learn at school. It's something that you practice, right? And the more experiences you have, I think, put you in more situations where you can learn to practice that.
One of the beautiful quotes that it was said by Kobe Bryant, and he said that once you have that honesty in learning, just the universe becomes your library, sort of, and it starts showing you the answers that you needed, because you have that seriousness that you talked about and honesty to your craft, and at least you know the direction and you want to go there. So now there's something that's helping you in the way. So I think we'll leave it to that, and thank you so much for the beautiful conversation. It was I felt like I was in an art history class, sort of.
Well, thank you. No, it was very enjoyable.
Thank
I
you.
don't have an art history degree. but always good to end on a Kobe quote.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we do part 2.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now waiting outside, we didn't want to disturb.
No, that was really good.
Oh, that was an interesting.
Let's make sure we save this.
Stay humble and be very confident at the same time. It's a really nice quote.